There's something fundamentally enjoyable about controlling a character. Doesn't even really matter what that character is. Could be an alien, could be a mech, or it could be a chibi-style driller with an obsession for downward mobility. My point is, Mr. Driller has an appeal for anyone like me who more or less enjoys block-based puzzlers but prefers the almost tactile feel of controlling a single entity. When you stop to think about it, the concept of Tetris is downright bizarre compared to 90+% of modern games which see the player taking on the role of a single character. In Tetris, our perspective is more like some kind of kamikaze spirit, possessing each block, dropping it to its doom, then reincarnating at the top of the well. I argued that Tetris might be perfect in another video, an assessment I still stand by, but there's a rapid loop of disconnecting and reconnecting control with different entities that you don't find in most games. Having become a worldwide phenomenon, nobody was shy about following in those footsteps, which gave rise to countless play-alikes, but it's not hard to imagine a timeline where Mr. Driller happened to emerge first, maybe making Tetris seem too strange for mass market appeal. Games like Puzzle Bobble and Magical Drop already show some inclination away from playing as faceless cogs in a machine by giving players a character at the bottom of the well onto which they can project. Mr. Driller is that concept fully realised, because instead of sitting outside the playfield as nothing more than a cosmetic touch, he climbs over and manipulates blocks himself, which is exactly what gives his game its unique value. Apart from the obvious literal sense, it would be a mistake to call Mr. Driller a deep game. Tap the action button to destroy the next block, which might set off a catastrophe or just harmlessly make way. Everything else unfolds elegantly from that simple premise, but the full extent of these interactions is still simple. Movement is responsive and not bogged down by momentum, which might overcomplicate the process. My one complaint with the controls would be how survival during later stages can sometimes hinge on precision inputs to break the next block as soon as possible. It should be enough just to keep the button held, but at least a Turbo Fire controller might be able to solve this problem. Apart from that one quibble, focus is entirely on finding the safest path in that easy-to-learn, hard-to-master Goldilocks zone you'd hope for. Mr. Driller may not be the best example of the kind of joy you can derive from this genre, but there's more of it to be found than first impressions might lead you to believe. At their best, these types of games almost allow you to feel your brain rewriting itself while it adapts to an arbitrary rule set with no basis in reality. For example, over time, some part of your awareness becomes dedicated to knowing which colour of block hangs directly overhead and tracking where the next instance of that colour can be found on either side. In other words, when this block falls, will it crush me? Mr. Driller is all about becoming increasingly good at answering that one question, and unlike most similar games where a player is eroded down over time, Mr. Driller benefits from being dangerous right from the first screen. There's no time wasting and few extraneous elements to its gameplay, really just being rounded out by the X blocks and air canisters, which intermittently increase the challenge by encouraging players to avoid the bad or touch the good. Every 100 meters, some small wrinkle in the algorithm also changes how each stage is constructed, which breaks up the innate repetition. One biome is so easy it acts as a breather, whereas another mercilessly locks away every refill. Much like Tetris and its ilk, randomization is a necessary factor for replayability, which, if you ask me, makes it a poor score attack game, blah blah blah. But at least if you disagree with that point of view, the way scoring works is worthy of some praise. Each canister is worth 100 points, plus the sum of all previous canisters, which means they quickly become the dominant method of scoring. A player still struggling to master the mechanics might only grab every second or third canister to save time, whereas someone more skilled will try to nab them all for a good score, introducing an additional layer of challenge. There's basically two goals a scoring system can accomplish. It can change the way players approach the game by offering more depth through more complicated decision making with increased risk-reward payouts, or it can simply act as a measurement of how far the player got. In an arcade context, the latter is not such a bad thing. Players want to be able to compete with one another, and it stands to reason that the player who survived the longest or drilled the furthest should walk away with a better score. But Mr. Driller already tracks depth anyway, so a score should really provide some other measurement. It's a little strange that only depth is tracked for Endless Mode, which wasn't even present for the initial arcade release, but at least this helps me prove my point. Play both modes while aiming for the highest possible number, and you'll see how different your priorities and behaviour becomes. Personally, I find depth to be a more enjoyable target, but there's no harm allowing players to choose which goal they prefer. It's in Endless Mode where the continuity of action pays off most of all, because there's something addictive about just trying to get deeper. At times that aspect can be so satisfying, it's like indulging some candy-coloured death drive within yourself. Later entries in this genre have been scientifically engineered to make the act of popping chains as addictive as possible, but even so, few can compete with Mr. Driller's constant sense of forward progress. Outside of that, it might not be exceptional in any other way, but that's been enough for me to revisit it many times over the years, so it must count for something. As for the presentation, a simplistic visual style seems like a necessity for such a cluttered and rapidly moving board to be readable, so it's not worth putting the graphics under too much scrutiny. The slightly pastel colours are appealing and easy to distinguish, but most of all I found myself impressed by how effective the air meter was at signalling its severity through just peripheral vision. Starts blue, goes green, ends red. 3 primary colours vibrantly rendered, easy to distinguish without so much as a glance. It has everything it needs to be considered a fully finished, well-implemented version of its core concept. Like Tetris, there's a whole bunch of features that might be tacked on to make Mr. Driller even better, but it's hard not to respect its stripped-down simplicity for what it is. Fall into the flow state this game fosters, and life becomes a simple matter of advancing one screen at a time.